A clay tablet cracks in the firelight, tiny wedges pressed into wet earth. 3,000 years ago, now hardened by catastrophe. The message is not poetry, not myth. It's a warning. Ships on the horizon, cities burning, eyes silent. Ugarit didn't die in darkness. It died with receipts, letters, inventories, prayers, and panicked dispatches captured at the exact moment a whole world system began to fail. Tonight we follow those last messages into the port city of Ugarit, modern Russia, on Syria's coast, where merchants spoke in many tongues, scribes invented an alphabet, and palaces ran on spreadsheets made of clay. And then, suddenly, the network snapped. The Bronze Age collapse isn't one battle or one villain. It's a chain reaction. Ugarit is the place where you can hear the chain starting to break. Ugarit was not a lonely ruin waiting for archaeologists. It was a switchboard. Copper from Cyprus, tin from far inland, luxury goods from Egypt, fine pottery from the Aegean, everything moved through this coast. In its markets, you could buy purple dye, cedar, glass, incense, and the kind of gossip that travels faster than caravans. When a switchboard goes down, every line connected to it starts to crackle. The palaces of the late Bronze Age weren't just royal homes. They were operating systems. Grain came in, rations went out. Ships were logged, armies were supplied, diplomats were bribed, temples were fed. It worked because it was centralized and because everyone depended on everyone else. Ugarit lived on agreements, treaties with the Hittites, respect from Egypt, trade with Cyprus, and fragile peace with neighbors who were always one drought away from raiding. And then there's the miracle that makes Ugarit famous. It's writing alongside the international language of Akkadian cuneiform. Ugarit used an alphabetic cuneiform script signs that could map sound to speech with startling efficiency. This wasn't just culture, it was infrastructure. When the city fell, the scribes' libraries fell with it, and the fire that killed Ugarit also baked its memory into stone-hard clay. We know the name of Ugarit's last king, Ammurapi. His reign sits at the edge of a cliff late 13th to early 12th century BCE, when rumors were turning into refugees. He inherited a city built for trade and diplomacy, not for surviving a planetary-scale stress test. In his letters, you can feel the moment confidence becomes desperation. The polite greetings remain, but underneath them the world is sliding. To understand why Ugarit mattered, you have to zoom out. The Eastern Mediterranean was a web, the Hittite Empire in Anatolia, Egypt in the south, city-states along the Levant, Mycenaean kingdoms across the sea. Bronze was the lifeblood, an alloy that required copper and tin from different places. This made the world rich, advanced, and unbelievably interconnected, which also made it brittle. Interconnection is power, until it becomes dependency. In good years, the system sank. In bad years, it coughed. Evidence from multiple regions points to drought and crop stress in the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC. Harvests shrink, prices rise, and hungry people move. Add earthquakes along fault lines, political succession crises, and the constant drain of war, and you get a civilization running without a safety margin. Collapse doesn't begin with flames, it begins with shortages. Shortages turn allies into rivals. They turn soldiers into bandits. They turn sea routes into hunting grounds. Egyptian inscriptions later describe groups we call the Sea Peoples, but labels hide the messier truth. Displaced communities, raiders, mercenaries, and coalitions of desperation moving by land and sea. Whether they were one people or many, their impact was real. Coastal cities reported attacks that looked like a wave breaking on stone walls. Ugarit heard the wave coming because it was already taking coals from everywhere else. Let us mention trouble in nearby regions, requests for grain, reports of ships, and the kind of administrative scrambling that happens when leaders realize the situation is bigger than a local problem. This is what makes Ugarit different from legend. It isn't a story told centuries later. It's a city taking minutes in real time, while the meeting room catches fire. One message stands out because it feels terrifyingly modern. A ruler explains that the enemy ships have arrived, that towns are burning, and that his own forces are a weight pulled into someone else's war. It's the nightmare of every border state. You're loyal, you pay your taxes, you send your troops, And when your moment comes, the empire is too busy to save you. Ugarit was vassal to the Hittites. When the Hittite system wobbled, Ugarit swayed with it. Imagine the geography. Ugarit faces the sea, but it is also boxed between empires and mountain routes. If sea raiders cut the coast and inland routes falter, the city becomes an island without water. And in the final years, even the basics get weird records of missing shipments, anxious accounting, and defensive preparations. When a civilization's paperwork becomes survival literature, you're already past the point of normal. There's a cruel irony here. The reason we can hear Ugarit's last voice is the same reason it died. The palace and elite houses burned. The heat fired unfired tablets like pottery in a kiln. Thousands of messages survived because a city was incinerated. Archaeologists later found archives in homes, temples, and administrative cortisol libraries frozen. It's like finding a phone still recording when the building collapses. Ugarit's modern rediscovery began with chance. In 1928, a farmer's plow near the Syrian coast struck a stone tomb. Soon excavators arrived at Ras Shamra, and the ground started giving up rooms full of tablets. Names, debts, prayers, shipping lists, an NTRCT's nervous system preserved. Archaeology doesn't usually hand you a civilization's last inbox. Here, it did, and every season of digging added more voices to the final chorus. One archive belonged to a merchant prince named Artenu, whose household handled trade on a scale that feels almost industrial. His tablets track deals with distant cities, shipments of metals, and disputes that read like ancient customer support tickets. This matters because it proves Ugarit wasn't merely rich. It was operational, dependent on constant motion. When that motion slowed, elites, workers, and temples all felt it at once. The tablets also reveal a cosmopolitan reality. Akkadian for diplomacy, local Ugaritic, plus traces of Hittite, Aryan, and more. Ugarit didn't just trade goods. It traded language and law. That multilingual capability was a strategic advantage until crisis turned communication into noise. When every neighbor is shouting for grain, for soldiers, for rescue, being connected can feel less like power and more like drowning in other people's emergencies. And then we reach the letter that chills historians. Ammurapi, writing back to the king of Alasia, Cyprus, explaining that enemy ships have appeared, that his cities are burning, and that his troops and chariots aren't home. The phrasing is formal, almost restrained, which makes it worse. It's not a scream. It's a status report from a man watching the coastline fail in real time. In those archives, you can see how advanced the late Bronze Age really was. This wasn't primitive barter. This was international finance in bronze and grain. Merchants had credit, palaces had quotas, ships had manifests. The city tracked copper in tons, not trade. That sophistication creates a trap. Specialization. If your city is built to process trade, and trade stops, you don't just get poorer, you lose the machine that keeps you fed. So what exactly hit Ugarit? A single enemy. Multiple attacks. A storm of disasters. The honest answer is probably all of the above, in a sequence that left no recovery time. The destruction level at Ugarit shows burning and weapon debris, but it also shows something else. Evacuation. Many valuables are missing, suggesting people fled before the final blaze. That's not a sudden, one-night surprise. That's a community reading the signs and running out of options, and those signs were not supernatural. Forget the fantasy of a single curse. Ugarit's curse was systemic. Climate stress, tightening food supply, political alliances, fraying, trade arteries, clogging, and armed groups exploiting the gaps. When leaders talk about the enemy, they often mean a symptom, not a cause. The raiders are the match. The fuel is everything that made the system brittle in the first place. Still, the story has teeth because of its specificity. Ammurapi writes to powerful neighbors Karkumish, Alasia begging for chariots, troops, assistance. The tone is respectful, formal, and desperate. It reads like someone following protocol while the walls shake. That's the Bronze Age in a nutshell. Extraordinary bureaucracy right up to the moment it becomes useless. You can hear the friction between a world of etiquette and a world of emergency. Why didn't help arrive? Because help was also on fire. The Hittite heartland was under strain. Egypt was fighting its own battles. Mycenaean centers across the Aegean were collapsing or transforming. When every node in a network is stressed at once, there is no safe place to send reinforcements from. The system's greatest strength and dependence turns into synchronized failure. Ugarit wasn't abandoned by one ally. It was abandoned by the ERA itself. To make it worse, Ugarit's own forces were sometimes deployed elsewhere, caught in the logic of empire. Think of it like this. The city paid for insurance by serving the Hittite machine. But when the machine ceased, the premium was gone and the protection never arrived. In the last years, even routine things, repairing ships, collecting taxes, transporting grain, become acts of risk. Civilization becomes a gamble, and most people can't afford the stakes. Ugarit also sat near a fault line, literally. Earthquakes strike the region, and some temples show evidence of earlier destruction. Even when quakes aren't the direct cause of a city's final destruction, they can be the shove that weakens walls, breaks storage, and forces expensive rebuilding at the worst possible time. Natural shocks don't have to kill you. They just have to arrive when you're already starving, overstretched, and politically exposed. Inside Ugarit's temples, the gods were not abstract. Baal, Lord of Storms, Dagon, Anat, the divine family that shaped Ugarit's mythic imagination. The famous Baal cycle tells of chaos, death, and returned storms that fail, SOS. That rock, when drought bites and ships burn, myth stops being a story and starts feeling like weather. In moments of collapse, people don't become irrational. They reach for the oldest language they have to explain terror. But here's the twist. Ugarit didn't just pray, it recorded. It negotiated. It tried to adapt. That's what makes this tragedy sharper than legend. We're not watching doomed people ignore the signs. We're watching smart administrators attempt damage control in a situation that keeps escalating. The city heard the collapse coming, because it was already receiving the collapse in fragments, like waves arriving before the storm front becomes visible. Somewhere along the coast, the horizon changed. Not just smoke, but absence. Fewer sails flying friendly colors, fewer cargoes arriving, fewer traders willing to risk the route. A port lives on rhythm arrivals and departures. Like a heartbeat, when the harbor goes quiet, fear may be seen, and fear spreads faster than famine. Refugees carry stories. Raiders follow them. Governments respond with taxes, conscription, and suspicion. The social fabric frays from both ends. If you've ever wondered how advanced societies collapse, Ugarit gives you the anatomy. First, supply chains wobble, then security costs rise, then trust erodes, then institutions cannibalize the future to pay for the present. More levies, harsher rationing, more forced labor. Eventually, the people who keep the city functioning, sailors, farmers, scribes, either flee, die, or switch loyalties. At that point, walls are just expensive decorations. How do we date the fall? Ugarit's own paperwork helps. Tablets mention Egyptian officials whose careers can be anchored, and imported pottery in the destruction layer. Mashes a narrow window in Aegean chronology. Science adds another pin. Radiocarbon dates from the site align with a destruction around 1192 to 1190 BCE. Give or take a few years. This isn't mythic time, it's calendar time tight enough to compare with collapses across the sea. There's a grim footnote. Some texts suggest the court was still corresponding with high-level figures in Egypt shortly before the end. That means Ugarit wasn't forgotten. It was known, acknowledged, and still trading messages until it wasn't. The silence that follows is part of the evidence. Bureaucracies hate loose ends. When letters stop midstream, it usually means the people who write them are gone. Weapons speak, too. Arrowheads and debris in the destruction layer point to violent assault, not mere abandonment. But the distribution suggests chaos defense in multiple directions. Panic in cramped streets, fire spreading through wooden roofs. No heroic last stand survives in the tablets. What survives is logistics failing. Ships that don't arrive, troops that don't return, allies that don't answer. Violence is the finale. The breakdown is the plot. Put Ugarit beside other sites Atusa, Mycenae, Pila, coastal towns along the Levant, and the pattern becomes unmistakable. Not a single domino, but many falling close together. Some falls are sudden, some are drawn out, some are transformations disguised as ruin. Ugarit is valuable because it sits on the shoreline of that pattern with a microphone in its hand. It doesn't just show collapse, it narrates Italiano. And then the end arrives not as a neat date, but as a burn layer. Sometime around the turn of the 12th century BCE, Ugarit is destroyed. The palace complex is scorched, houses collapse, archives are buried. The city does not rebound. Later, smaller settlements appear, but the high-powered node of the Bronze Age network is gone. That's what collapse looks like. Not the planet ending, but a certain kind of world ending permanently. The chilling part is what happens to the rest of the region. The Hittite Empire falls apart. Many Mycenaean palaces are destroyed or abandoned. Egyptian power contracts. Trade shrinks. Writing becomes rarer in some areas. Long-distance luxury becomes local survival. For centuries, historians once called it a dark age, not because people stopped living, but because the big, literate, interconnected system dimmed. Ugarit's tablets are bright sparks inside that dimming. So was it the sea peoples who did it? They likely played a major role in coastal destruction, but they were not a magical apocalypse. Think of them as pressure-made visible movement, triggered by hunger, conflict, and opportunity. A stressed world produces predators, and predators produce more stress. Ugarit's letters don't give us a single mastermind. They give us something more unsettling. A picture of cascading failure where no one is fully in control. There's also a quieter villain. Tin. Bronze needs it, and tin sources are limited. Disrupt tin, and you disrupt weapons, tools, and prestige goods. Disrupt weapons, and states lose coercive power. Disrupt tools, and farmers lose productivity. Collapse isn't only about armies. It's about materials. The Bronze Age was a technological regime with a supply. Probe-land Ugarit sat inside that regime like a cog that couldn't turn when the oil ran out. And yet, not everything collapsed equally. Some regions adapted. Some communities reorganized. New peoples rose. Iron technologies spread. Alphabetic writing evolved. The Bronze Age world didn't vanish, it reconfigured. That matters, because collapse is often used like a horror word. In reality, it's a transformation with winners, losers, and long aftermath. For Ugarit, the transformation was fatal. For others, it was an opening. Ugarit's legacy, ironically, becomes larger after its death. Those alphabetic cuneiform signs show an early experiment in making writing faster and more accessible. Its myths echo through later Near Eastern and Mediterranean traditions. Its archives reveal how international the ancient world already was. How people navigated languages, laws, and markets with sophistication we tend to reserve for modernity. Ugarit isn't just a casualty, it's a len. Now, let's deal with the title's promise. Did Ugarit hear collapse coming? Yes, because it was a communication hub. The city's last century is full of signals. Diplomatic stress, food concerns, military alerts, frantic requests. What it didn't have was a lever big enough to change the outcome. Hearing danger is not the same as being able to stop it. That's the brutal lesson of highly connected systems. Warnings can be loud and still be useless. If you stand on the ruins today, you're standing on a threshold between worlds. One step back is a time of palaces, chariots, bronze, and globalized trade. One step forward is a patchwork of smaller powers, shifting identities, and new technologies. Ugarit is the hinge, and the hinge is where you hear the groan of the door before it breaks. There's a temptation to romanticize collapse to turn it into a myth of punishment or a thriller with a clean ending. Don't. For the people of Ugarit, it meant hunger, fear, displacement, and loss of everything they trusted to be permanent. Their last letters are not entertainment. They're testimony, and that's why they matter. They force us to see collapse not as an abstract chart, but as lived experience, written in clay by hands that were shaking. So what do we do with Ugarit's voice? We listen for patterns. When trade becomes too centralized, when resilience is treated as waste, when leaders assume tomorrow will always look like yesterday's systems become elegant and fragile. Ugarit's world was stunningly sophisticated. It still fell. That isn't a reason to panic. It's a reason to respect complexity and build slack into the machine. And the final irony, Ugarit was erased from the map, but it outlived its destroyers in the only way that matters to history, by leaving evidence. The invaders, whoever they were, burned buildings. They could not burn the words once they were fired into clay. The city that died became a narrator. The collapse that tried to silence it became the very reason we can still hear it. Next time someone tells you the ancient world was simple, remember Ugarit, a multilingual port with contracts, diplomacy, industrial-scale trade, and an alphabet in progress. Remember how quickly complexity can unravel when the margins disappear. And remember that the first sound of collapse isn't always a scream. Sometimes it's a polite letter sent to an ally who will never answer. Because somewhere under that ash, the last message still waits. Not a prophecy, not a curse, just a human attempt to warn, to ask, to survive. Ugarit heard the Bronze Age collapse coming, and in a way, it's still calling out across the water. If you want more stories where myth collides with evidence-lost cities, forbidden tech, wars that rewrote time, subscribe to Arcane Curio Chronicles. The past isn't dead, it's archived.